Hi, I'm Jane McCallion.
And I'm Adam Shepherd.
Welcome to the ITPro Podcast, your weekly guide to the most important topics in the IT industry.
Fans of ITPro may remember the UK Cloud Awards, which is our long-running award show celebrating the best and brightest of talent in the UK cloud market. And nominations are now open for the UK Cloud Awards 2020.
Indeed they are, and this year we have 20 categories as well, whereas previously it has been 17. If you want to get on board and put forward your nomination, we will include a link to the page on our website, which will give you more information about all the different categories, how to enter, when the deadline is, and everything like that. So if you use the cloud, if you've got an interesting cloud project, click on the link, have a look, and put yourself in for a nomination.
And the awards themselves have been really spruced up this year. We've changed it around a lot. It's bigger, it's better. We've got a brand new venue. It's very shiny and very exciting. It's going to be a really good show this year, I think.
Indeed, and if you make it onto the shortlist and come to the event, you may indeed get to meet me and or Adam.
As if you didn't need any more reason to join.
So we open with the biggest story of the week so far, which is that Microsoft accidentally exposed 250 million customer records over the late December period.
Yeah, this is a pretty jaw-dropping story as far as they go. I mean, it's 250 million, as you said, which is a good chunk of Microsoft's customer base. And for a company that has only just come off the back of a really rather serious cryptographic flaw in Windows 10, it's not really the kind of story you want to be hearing.
No, so the whole problem is down to a misconfigured security command. There was an update that introduced this misconfiguration on the 5th of December. Luckily, really, for everyone, it was caught not that long later, New Year's Eve, and it was fixed the same day. And according to Microsoft, there has been no malicious use, but customers who are affected are being notified.
Interestingly, Microsoft hasn't said where these records come from in terms of areas of its business. Like, they haven't said whether it's commercial customers, consumers buying things like Windows 10 or Office 365. They haven't said whether it's their enterprise or government contacts that have been exposed. It's really rather distressingly vague.
Yeah, I mean, all that we know is that the records that were exposed go back as far as 2005, so which predates most of their actual cloud efforts, and they contain conversation logs between Microsoft support agents and customers. Also, they've said that in the vast majority of cases, their records were cleared of all personal information, so that's as part of its standard data security practices. But there are a handful that, for example, email addresses may have been included. So not a huge worry. I mean, it's a big embarrassment from a customer point of view, though it's not a massive worry.
Yeah, it's more embarrassing for Microsoft, particularly a company of its caliber. But on the other hand, it also underlines the fact that data breaches can happen to anyone. And if a company with the resources and the scale of Microsoft can be affected by something like this to kind of such a degree, as you say, kind of 250 million is a big number, it really can happen to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So in a rather dramatic turn of events, journalist Glenn Greenwald, founder of The Intercept and also an instrumental part of the Snowden leaks, has been arrested in Brazil for alleged cybercrimes.
Yes, so in case you're not familiar with Glenn Greenwald, or your memory's a bit rusty of who he is, he used to work for The Guardian. He was a columnist for quite a long time, and yes, he was instrumental in bringing to light the Snowden links, which was PRISM and all that kind of NSA stuff. He moved to Brazil not long after, founded The Intercept Brazil, and he has apparently been working to uncover some alleged corruption in the Brazilian government and judiciary, and he has been arrested on suspicion of hacking.
Now, it's quite a vague charge, from what I understand. One of the accusations is that he's been working with cybercriminals who he's been encouraging to destroy evidence, effectively, to destroy logs and records and databases that they have leaked to him after he's received them to help kind of cover their tracks.
Yeah, which is effectively a sort of conspiracy to commit a crime type thing, rather than necessarily actively being involved. Although there are also allegations that he had active access to some of the Telegram communications, I believe. The Electronic Frontier Foundation and Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, who's the previous president of Brazil, have said that it's effectively trumped up charges because Greenwald has upset the current president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro.
It is convenient that he has been charged with these crimes pretty much directly after launching kind of, as you say, a couple of major investigations into corruption within the Brazilian judiciary.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the early stages of what's going on. It's hard to say right now what's gonna happen. As a journalist, yes, it is a bit worrying. He is somebody who's been targeted before because of his work. We'll have to see where it goes.
So, in other news, IBM has had quite a good quarter, it turns out. The company has just released its fourth quarter financials for 2019, and it has had its first quarter of growth since 2018, which is a big deal. Yeah,
so IBM had 5 consecutive quarters of negative growth, as they call it, and this quarter just gone, the final quarter of 2019, year-on-year revenue finally growing. It was up by 0.1%, which may not sound super impressive, but is better than nothing or indeed declining revenue. And also, when you look at where it came from, turns out that acquisition of Red Hat, pretty good idea, because growth in Red Hat and its business unit,
which is the cloud and cognitive division, which also houses the company's various Watson projects.
So Red Hat grew 24% year on year, which is quite tidy, and so the cloud and cognitive software division grew in total by 8.7%.
I mean, it really is kind of a mark of endorsement, I think, for the company's Red Hat acquisition, which kind of raised some eyebrows at the time. Of course, we mentioned in last week's episode that the company managed to land a $1 billion deal with Banco Sabadell, mainly based around Red Hat's hybrid cloud offering, which will have gone no small way towards helping those numbers. But if it can continue landing deals of that caliber, then Red Hat could be set for even greater things under Big Blue's banner. But the interesting thing for me is, buried somewhere within these results is the figure that IBM's systems division, which houses business units like its Z System mainframe business, grew 68% year on year, which will be surprising to many people, because many people have written off the mainframe as yesterday's technology that's been supplanted by things like hyperconverged infrastructure and cloud and whatnot. But if these results are anything to go by, the mainframe is nowhere near dead yet.
Well, yeah, you love a mainframe anyway.
I mean, who doesn't love a mainframe, really?
Yeah, and mainframes to an extent, as I was once told, private cloud and big data analytics and data pools, are what were once called mainframe, and that was what mainframe was used for. So, to an extent, mainframe probably hasn't really gone away. It's just been given different names or not spoken about because it's not quite as sexy as some of the other more modern stuff. We're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, we'll be joined by Jon Topper, who is CEO of The Scale Factory.
See you after the break.
Hello, I'm Ollie Mann, and every Friday on The Week Unwrapped, we cover the stories you might have missed with journalists from theweek.co.uk. It's all the big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. That's The Week Unwrapped with me, Ollie Mann, available now for free from all good podcast apps.
Welcome back. We are now joined by Jon Topper, and he is going to tell us everything we need to know about DevOps and enterprise cloud. Jon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jon, before we dive into the questions, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your role and the Scale Factory in general.
Sure. So the Scale Factory is a London-based cloud and DevOps consultancy. We've been going since 2009. We are growing year on year. We work with primarily with AWS users these days. We're an Amazon Web Services consulting partner at the advanced tier. And we work with a range of customers across sort of business sizes and different market sectors, so fintech, e-commerce, health tech, that sort of thing. We're quite sort of diverse in that way. My role, I founded the business about 11 years ago now and was originally doing a lot of the sort of engineering, the technical side of things. I've now grown the team to the point where my role is much more strategic, which is code for email, spreadsheets, and meetings. But I keep a hand in the tech. I like to know what's going on. I keep my certifications up. I like to be able to have technical conversations with clients, with the team. So I'm never sort of entirely away from it. But my day-to-day is much more hands-off than it was.
It's the curse of the technologist, isn't it? The higher you get up in the organisation, the less you actually touch the tech.
Right, yeah, and the same's true everywhere. Like, you get good at something technology-wise, and someone says, hey, why don't you be in charge of people? And it turns out that that's a massive career change because the skill sets involved are really different. And so I've got people on my team now who are going through that learning process, who luckily have the benefit of me having done that a few years ago as well, which, it was quite it was a difficult time in terms of kind of where you get your feedback loops from and where your dopamine hits come from, like how you feel productive. And I'm now sort of out the other side now, and I kind of understand that something that I changed today will now have an effect in 3 months rather than sort of immediately. But that was difficult to come to terms with initially.
So, as somebody that specialises in cloud and DevOps, my first question is waterfall development. Is it dead?
So waterfall development, I think philosophically we think it's dead, right? The notion of waterfall development being that you kind of sit in a room for 3 months, inventing a spec and kind of deciding what your software is going to do, and then maybe put that into a dev team for, I don't know, a year, 2 years time or something, where they diligently follow the edicts handed down from the ivory tower, and then those things get handed off to test engineers or testers who then spend some amount of months testing stuff and validating that the software works the way you intended. That's a horrible way of working, and I think we've sort of acknowledged as an industry that it actually doesn't work, or at least it doesn't generate products of any real quality. Those sort of long feedback loops don't really help. Whether or not it's dead probably depends on your perspective. I think there are teams that are still practicing like that whilst still doing stand-ups and sort of doing their sort of scrummy agile ceremonies. They're misguided. I think they need some help. So I think as an industry, we've agreed that waterfall doesn't work. But in terms of the even distribution of the alternative practices, I think there are teams doing well at it in pockets, and probably a long tail of people who are still struggling to do a good job.
So, in your opinion, does DevOps need to be a kind of holistic, all-encompassing initiative, or can you just have a DevOps team?
So the prevailing wisdom in the DevOps community is that a DevOps team is an anti-pattern, right? You can't sort of say this team now does DevOps because that's sort of antithetical to the principle. Now, DevOps doesn't have a manifesto in the way that the agile community does, right? So it's sort of difficult.
Do you think it needs one?
Well, I think it would have helped adoption and saved us a lot of what is DevOps conversations had one existed early on. Like, you can't really point to a definition and say it's definitely that because there are so many of them.
The article on our site, "What is DevOps?" would beg to disagree.
I'm sure it would. I'm sure it would disagree with a handful of other definitions as well. I mean, ultimately, the DevOps movement was founded to try and bring together people writing software and people operating software to collaborate much more closely on the ownership of delivery, of quality, and of availability, and getting stuff done, basically, towards the business end or towards the business goal. And the way that that's been implemented in a handful of places has been to stand up a DevOps team. So you can probably understand if the idea was, let's make sure that the developers and the operations teams are working together as a whole, as one kind of organization, then siloing off the DevOps behaviors into a different team is probably not the right approach. Now, that's the hardline view. My view is that as a transitionary position is probably helpful, where you might have a sort of an existing infrastructure and existing teams who are delivering on stuff that your business has done historically, and your forward-looking view is that one day you will have a team that is holistically tackling the development and operations of the software as one group. Then founding a DevOps team as a group of developers and operations experts who are then delivering your new solutions, such that you transition to that model, is probably reasonable. But most people who you would see at a DevOps Days conference or something would say, no, you can't have a DevOps team. That's not a thing. I'm a little less dogmatic than that, I think. Whether it needs to be a holistic view, which is your question, I think there's an argument that says you need to, if you want to implement those sorts of behaviours, you have to do so both at a grassroots level and at an organisational level. Like, you have to get buy-in from business owners, just as you have to get buy-in from the people on the ground. And so, yes, there's a sort of holistic approach that's needed there. You also, I think, these days we're looking at things like DevSecOps and sort of adding other nouns to that compound, where we're now saying actually it's important for people who are building and operating software to also be thinking about security early on. And what we're really doing is moving the sort of the boundaries of what developers care about away from just I've cut code and now I go home to I've cut code that is secure, code that can be operated, code that I can understand, code that is safe, and sort of doing all of that as part of the development process. And that's really what it's about for me, I think.
So with that in mind, what do you think, when organisations are building out a DevOps competency, what skills do you think they need to be looking for?
So a team of people who want to practice DevOps, honestly, the most important thing that I think a lot of organisations miss is the sort of level of communication skill and kind of emotional intelligence. So it's often the case that teams adopting a DevOps approach already have the technology skills in their organisation. They're just in the wrong place, or they're being pointed in the wrong direction. And really, there's a sort of a large component of understanding what your counterparts in the organisation care about and knowing why that's important, how it aligns with your business goal, and your ability to negotiate a sort of compromise position or a way forward based on that shared understanding. So it's really less about the tech skills than it is about the interpersonal skills. That said, there are a bunch of tech skills that are useful. We build continuous integration and delivery pipelines, so we sort of need to understand automation tooling and those sorts of things. But often technologists can learn the tech side of that much more easily than they can learn the emotional and interpersonal side of it.
Are there any tech tools that you'd particularly recommend from that perspective?
That's one of those kind of it depends questions that consultants are really fond of. I think it used to be the case when we were looking at traditional configuration management, like should you be using Puppet or Chef was the sort of question you could ask, and the answer was just yes. Like, you should definitely be using like one of those tools to manage your infrastructure. That is less true now. We have different ways of thinking about how to manage deployments of platforms. Terraform is very popular as a tool, like for standing up your cloud platform and associated things. There's some great work coming out of the team at Pulumi, who a couple of the guys on that team I know through the DevOps scene who used to work on Terraform, and they're writing a tool that allows you to define your infrastructure as actual software in things like TypeScript or Go or Java, such that you sort of your team are able then to use something that looks familiar to do things that look unfamiliar, and get that sort of parity match right, which is a really cool thing. So it would be remiss of me as an Amazon Web Services partner not to say the whole Amazon ecosystem is worth looking at. Realistically, you'll probably want to be doing this on a cloud somewhere. Amazon is the most popular, the most profitable. Maybe you should consider that. In terms of other sort of individual tools, really, that's on a team by team, on a kind of project by project basis, really.
And so, kind of thinking, I guess, a bit more about cloud generally, what would you say are the biggest obstacles to enterprise cloud success? What are the problems that you see over and over again?
So the obstacles to enterprise cloud success is, some of those, again, are interpersonal. Like there's the changing of minds so that people think about the cloud as somewhere that is safe enough for their data and appropriate for the type of stuff that they're doing. And I think we're away through that battle to an extent, in as far as a lot of businesses are adopting cloud. But I think that it's either sort of 4 or 8% or something of, Amazon reckon that there's another 90-something% of workloads that still exist in data centers or still exist in office buildings that could be migrated and haven't been. And I think a lot of the reason why that hasn't moved is some of those things are big, unwieldy things. You mentioned IBM earlier, the mainframe business. If you have to redesign your application in order to move it, then there's an amount of investment that you have to put in that goes beyond just the picking up of the pieces and putting them somewhere else. So there's that as a consideration. In some cases, businesses can't really make a case financially for moving out to the cloud, and so we work with one large company in the UK who have a large amount of Microsoft workloads that are currently still sat in a data center, where they're trying to figure out right now whether AWS or Azure is the right destination for them. And the reason why they haven't prioritized that thus far is that it's a lot of effort for not a lot of change in spend, or possibly a more expensive spend. The cloud enables you to move quicker and be a bit more agile. These are line of business applications that haven't changed for the last 3 years. So what is the benefit of spending that extra money? Well,
is there an element then of sort of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? It's working fine, why should we move it?
There's definitely an element of that, yeah. I think businesses have moved the workloads for which there is an obvious benefit, but some of the long tail stuff, probably, if you're looking entirely at the commercials, it doesn't necessarily make sense to move out into the cloud, but we'll probably end up there eventually, I'd imagine.
Without necessarily divulging too much information, that company that you mentioned, I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about their kind of thought process and why they're having such a hard time deciding between AWS or Azure.
So the decision point as to whether or not this is AWS or Azure is twofold. So one, it's difficult for them to make a financial case for moving it anyway. So there's immediately a kind of a reticence to look too hard at spending money on it. They are substantial adopters of AWS already. So there are other business units who are doing web-facing, user-facing stuff with agile software delivery teams deploying code to it, and AWS was really beneficial for them. We were involved quite early on in their sort of journey out there. So there's an organizational leaning towards AWS. However, these are almost entirely Microsoft workloads, and so they need to be lift and shifted pretty much. So they would run as is. Some of them rely on sort of classic Microsoft components like SQL Server, Active Directory, those sorts of things. And so Azure is an appealing idea because there are a number of services that Microsoft offer that look a lot like the things that they would move. On the AWS side of the coin, particularly from the commercial perspective, Microsoft have changed the licensing model for SQL Server in non-Microsoft clouds, and so you look at the sort of economics of it, and they don't really necessarily stack up. The non-Amazon cloud vendors are throwing more money, more professional services time, more sort of advice and sort of freebies essentially at businesses who might want to move to their cloud. Amazon aren't competing on that basis, and so there's a golf game somewhere, presumably, where someone's come home going, oh, maybe Azure is the right idea. Personally, I don't think move to Azure would be the wrong answer for them. Even as an Amazon specialist, it would be a good fit. There's no reason why AWS wouldn't also be a good fit, and so they will ultimately make the decision one way or another. Some of that will be financial, I think, rather than functional.
So circling back to talking about DevOps and DevOps teams, is this just a question of melding the people who you already have in the business? Or do you want to also think about bringing in people who have experience or specialisms or just kind of looks like they would be a good fit for working in a DevOps way?
So DevOps transformation often involves bringing in expertise from the outside. I think that much is true. There are people in organisations that we've worked with who just don't want to work like that. They've maybe been sysadmins for 30, 40 years, and this whole idea that they might have to think about software a bit more is unappealing, and so they just are not interested in sticking around. If you're bringing people in from the outside, often younger developers will often be thinking about cloud and agile and those sorts of things because that's sort of what we're teaching them now. I don't know quite how widely pervasive that is in universities, but my understanding is that a lot of curriculums have embraced more modern approaches.
Well, I mean, aside from anything else, that's what they'll have grown up on by this point, right?
Right. Well, in theory, yeah, and particularly if they're from a sort of startup background or something of that nature. I think if you come straight out of a software development degree and right into an enterprise hellhole, then you're probably going to be sort of sat in a cubicle surrounded by people cutting code in a waterfall fashion and won't really necessarily have got used to that. But if you're a hobbyist, you're very likely to have tinkered with the cloud. You're very likely to have sort of seen some of the stuff that's going on in Hacker News or Reddit or other less toxic places, and adopted those things in your practice. So I think bringing people from the outside who have done some DevOps is probably worthwhile. I think that the successful transformations that we've seen involve a bit of team augmentation, but ultimately teaching those teams to fish rather than kind of doing the fishing for them, like bringing them along on a kind of journey of learning how to improve their availability and their defect rate and the speed with which they can deploy change safely. Often you need that sort of external impetus to say, yes, guys, this is possible, and here's how we're going to do it, and sort of break off that problem a bit at a time.
Well, unfortunately, that's about all we've got time for today. Jon, where can people find you? What are you up to?
What am I up to? So you can find me on Twitter as @JTopper. I'm usually having opinions about things or posting Instagram pictures of the things that I've cooked. You can find the Scale Factory at scalefactory.com. Right now, we're heavily involved in an Amazon Web Services program called Well Architected, which is a review framework for looking at how people have built their infrastructure and what decisions they've made. And that review covers performance, cost, security, operations, and availability. And we've run sort of 150 or more of those reviews in the last, say, 18 months. And we are available to do that for you if you're an AWS user. There are also funding programs available from Amazon to support improvements if we find problems with your infrastructure during that review. It's a great learning exercise for newcomers to the cloud, but also people who've been using the cloud for a while still find that they learn something. There's a lot of common things that most teams get wrong. And I'm going to be talking at QCon in March, the end of March, about the themes that we found whilst doing those reviews.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to hearing more about your talk.
You can find links to all of the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes and even more on our website, www.itpro.co.uk.
You can also follow us on Twitter @ITPro, as well as on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can also get in touch with us by emailing podcast@itpro.co.uk.
Don't forget to subscribe to the ITPro Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you find podcasts to never miss an episode. And we'll be back next week with more news and analysis from the world of IT. Until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.